Hi, everyone. I was sitting there listening to that song and things that were said earlier and just thinking, really, we can overly complicate things sometimes if we're not careful in life, can't we? And things can come rushing at us to remind us that there are simple things that we just need. And I'm glad you're here today to be reminded of that. Thank you for praying. I don't know if you knew we had one who was not well, and so we're praying for care for that one, and thankful for Sunday school class members round about that one. And so that's who we are, right? It's good to be part of a body of believers because you can't do this alone. You just can't. I know I hear that a lot of times. People say, well, I don't need church, or I don't need organized religion, which means they've never really gone to church because it's not that organized. And proof of that will be to see how we get 600 boxes out of here. It may look like somebody just, kicked a fire ant bed. I don't know, but we'll get it done, and I appreciate all that help there. But today I want to talk about one more set of spiritual disciplines. And I know that's not sound exciting for me to get up and say that, but really what I've been looking at these last several weeks is, how do you know that you're doing what a follower of Jesus Christ would do, right? I mean, we're surrounded by cultural Christianity. Right? We have kind of this image of like how to act like we're churchified Christians. But it's really quite simple, and we've looked at that, and so we're starting like the last set of 4 today. And we're going to do 2 of them because y'all are so smart. Y'all can do 2 at once. And they are these disciplines of simplicity and solitude, and they kind of go together. And that as we enact these, we become really, for lack of a better term, quietly loud. We speak volumes with very little as followers of Christ when we get this. We stand out from the world this way. And I don't know about you, but I learned at an early age just what I was worth, right? Do you know what you're worth? Okay, I'm going to tell you. You are worth by what somebody will replace you with. So that's kind of how that works. So I learned when I went off to school and I left my home as a teenager, I learned what had really been worth all that time by what my dad got to replace me, right? He got a television with a remote control. He had somebody come out and install an electric garage door opener. Yeah, you're tracking with me on this. Because I was always the one like, rain or shine, Jay, open the door. And my parents got a refrigerator with an ice maker. Right, are you tracking with me in there? So you find out what you're worth by what your absence leaves behind. And for each of you, that's unique. You have incredible worth. Yes, you would expect me to say this next line. I'm a pastor. I'm preaching from God's word, the simple good news. You are worth everything to God, so much that he gave his only begotten son. That's how much he loves you. And it makes me think, though, what are some of the aspects of being followers of Christ that really matter, that if we were not here would leave an incredible vacuum in the world? And it's not always what we think. Not always what we think. Because the world can figure out how to do religion. The world can figure out how to do idolatry. The world can figure out how to do culture, all those kind of things. But there are these things we're able to do that matter most. Okay, so everybody on this side, you're just going to have to look at this side, I guess. That's how that's going to work for the slides. Go AV team. They're awesome. Right? I love them. So thank you very much for their work. So anyway, here's the thing. The Bible speaks a wealth of truth about our economic realities that are there, from Old Testament to New. And there's this understanding of scarcity that you learn if you ever have kids, right? It's something kind of built into us that even though there might be plenty, we think we've got to get all that we can right now. And I've learned as a hiker that you don't have to carry with you more than you need. I made that mistake early on. And 40 pounds, of which 20 is more than what you really need to carry, after about the fourth mile is a bad idea. So again, the Bible speaks to us quite simply. And look over in John chapter 6. There's this one little story happening there, this wonderful story about our Savior having fed 5,000 people by the Sea of Galilee, right? You know this story and how it shows up, and they've been listening, and he feeds them. There's the bread and there's the loaves, and he feeds them those things, and they've eaten their full, and they get 12 baskets left over. The subtext of this story is that you need to know the Romans, there was a line called Panem et Circus, and the Romans were good at setting up a culture where they would show up every once in a while with a cart full of bread, pan, and give that to everybody. And then they would have the entertainment industry. And that's how they just kind of kept all the masses happy, right? They would say, look, we've got plenty, right? There's plenty of food for everybody, and they just come around and give out a little bit. And then they would say, look, at all the entertainment, go watch these guys swing swords at each other, right? Or put on pads or whatever, all those kind of things that they would do. And so Jesus shows up and sees people that are really hungry and doesn't give them just a few crumbs. He gives them all that they need and then some. And then they go like, oh, we want this dude to be king, right? If you read in that story, and he disappears, gets away from them. And then the next little story that happens in John chapter 6 is that Jesus is off by himself, and the disciples just go, well, we're going home. And they get in the boat and they leave, and the storm comes, the wind's blowing against them, and look, what do they see? Jesus walking on the water. It's a little short bit of the story, not the long version. And he says, it's me, don't be afraid. And he gets in, and when he gets there, immediately they reach the land. It's just an amazing story to think of that. I'm like trying to wrap my head around actually being there. And then the next day, the crowd all around the lake. The Sea of Galilee is not that big. It's called a sea, but it's really just a big lake. But it's a big one. And the people say, well, he's not here. And they get in their boats and they go to Capernaum where he is, which is where Jesus' home base had been at that time. And they get there and they find him. And they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? And Jesus answered them. It's the 26th verse. He says, very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. It's not really a way to grow a church in a crowd, people, right? I mean, it's so easy to grow a church by just putting on a big show and filling people up with things of the world. But what he's saying is this. He says, do not work for the food that perishes, verse 27, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal. That's that text that's there in that. And so we find there's that one story that happens. Now, another thing that I want to talk about today is not just about hungering just for the things of God, keeping it simple there, but also to think about wisdom with our words and how does that come about. Because I'm not a guy, honestly, I don't like to just talk a lot. I'm not an introvert or extrovert, kind of right there in the middle. And I'm also that guy that that sometimes leaves a conversation and goes, "Well, I wish I'd thought to say that." Anybody else in that club? Right? And then sometimes I've left a conversation going, "I wish I had thought not to say that." Right? You ever there? So in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, in the continuing wisdom of Solomon, he's saying, giving us this idea about being simple with our heart and our words and our presence before God. This idea of just stopping and not telling God, but listening instead. It says, do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven. You are on earth. Can we get that straight? Right? Tiny us. So let your words match your size. Then be few. And then over in Mark chapter 1, there is this other story. Let me get to that one. Mark chapter 1. Jesus has been a part of the crowds and the healing, and then there's all these folks that have been around him after he's been healing at Simon Peter's house. And in the morning, while it's still dark, he gets up and he goes to the deer stand. No. He gets up and he goes off by himself to a solitary place where he prayed. Now, I don't know, some years ago I remember being on the deer stand long after I knew anything was going to come out, and I would pray like, well, maybe today, I know they're all bedded down, they'll come back out. But really, it's not about getting to a deer stand as much as it is getting to a place where things are simple. And I've learned how important that is through the years. To get away alone and realize it doesn't all depend upon me, right? There's this old joke that I heard early on in ministry, and it's a joke. I want you to hear this, about a pastor who showed up at a church, and it was a railroad town, and that was there, and it's kind of a busy place, and people noticed, like, about once a week, he'd just kind of disappear for a couple of hours, and he'd go over to the train switching yard and just sit. Well, you know how people are. They start to talk. It's like, what's up with that new pastor of ours? Finally, one of the deacons says, well, I'll just go ask him what he's doing, why he does that. Why? Does he just like trains or what? So he goes over and he asks him, he said, Pastor, how come you come out here like for so much time, like a week, and just watch these trains move around like that? And he said to the deacon, he said, well, it's just really nice for me to realize that a lot of things can move without me pushing them. Right? If we're not careful, we can get a sense of self-importance. That it really does depend on us. And we need those reminders. And so today when I talk about simplicity and solitude, I'm talking about getting some things in our life kind of lined up. This is really setting up a system of values that are going to make you look different from the rest of the world. Now, again, there are people who are not Christians that can live simple lives. But because their whole goal is just to be simple, then their goal falls short of what God's really trying to accomplish by simplifying life. A lot of times people simplify their lives as they get older and all the kids are out of the house, right? We're kind of at that stage. We're boxing stuff up and going, hey, this tub is yours, kids. You get it. We're trying to have less things to have to trip over or hang out and hang around. People try to simplify lives intentionally. Some people simplify their life because the pressures of the world make it be so, right? Economically, pressures might make things, cause them to simplify their life. So those things kind of happen, but for us, how can we as followers of Christ be intentional about these ideas of being simple and having solitude as disciplines for our life that show on the outside the real change that's happening on the inside? What does it really accomplish for us? And so, again, we're going to look this week and next week at these four disciplines, and these come from the book Richard Foster's Celebration of Discipline. Great book. I mean, you don't have to read it. It's just a great study. I'll probably do a study on it later with you all separately. But he talks about these displayed, kind of public, showing disciplines for a Christian. One is simplicity, and that's how we approach the world materially, right? How do we really address all the stuff that we could get, and we do get, right? One time I did a study of the place where I lived of how many storage facilities there were in that place, in that county. And there was enough for every household to have more than one. So like people didn't have enough closet space that was there. Another thing I've learned through the years is that we gather more stuff. You can tell the age of a house by how many closets it has. You know that? Like if you go find an old house, like just ask real estate people, they can spot them, right? You got a house that's pre-World War II, pre the industrial boom of manufacturing and marketing and Mad Men and everybody selling us all kinds of stuff that we didn't really need. Man, those houses, man, if you had like 2 closets, you had a big house. And so we've gathered so much more stuff, and we have the opportunity to address that by simplifying things in our life. The other one is solitude. We live in a time where being alone is scary, right? I mean, if we cannot access the internet, we're panicking, right? If we can't look at something that makes us feel connected, it's hard for us. Being alone is one of those things that we equate with being a loser sometimes in our culture, and that's wrong. There's not anything wrong with spending time alone. Now, don't do it while walking down a dark alley in a dangerous place. I'm not recommending that. But I'm talking about finding time to just have solitude. Because when you spend time alone, you will find it strengthens you relationally. As you learn more of who you are, then you can plug in better to understanding others as individuals as well, loved by God. So let me kind of just move on from this. Richard Foster would say to us about our possessions, and again, this is something that somebody said to me long ago, is that we don't own possessions, possessions own us, right? I mean, trust me, you got to take care of them, and they dictate what we do with our life, especially if we have lots and lots of things. Our culture says that's the way to go to get more stuff. There's that joke, he who dies, with the most toys wins, or those kind of things that happen. That's not it. You wind up having to take care of the things in our life if we're not careful. We have those things that are there. And he says, Richard Foster says, if what we have we receive as a gift, every possession, every item, knowing it is to be cared for by God and is to be available to others, then we possess freedom from anxiety about those things. Do you hear the transaction? It's not that things in and of themselves are evil. It's how we view them reveals the evil in our heart. If it's mine, you don't touch it, wrong approach. But if we say, this is what God has allowed me to have, how can it be of help to you? Is a totally different response. This is when all the men are going in their mind going, oh, so-and-so still hasn't given me that tool back. All right? Because at our core, we think it's ours. But in the scope of eternity, it's only something you share. And its value increases the more you share it. God gave a model for this, the biblical model of Jubilee that he gave in the Old Testament to his people as they were moving toward the promised land. If you've ever studied this, looked at this, there's several texts, and I'm not able to go into great depth about it today. But the basic concept was that God was giving these people a rhythm, right? Every seventh day, you're not going to do work, you're going to stop, which was an amazing thing because they're hearing this in a desert, right? In a desert, you better get busy and work every day to have stuff to eat and water to drink, or you're going to die, right? I mean, but God said stop every day. Stop every week for one day and do nothing. But then he said, every seventh year, he said, when you get to the place that I'm showing you, this land flowing with milk and honey, and you have tribes and you have lands and all those things, he says, every seventh year, I want you to stop and let the land take a break so that it will be fertile. And then after you do that 7 times 7, he says, then after that 49th year, after you've done the Sabbath year 7 years, 7 times, on the 50th year, I want you to have a year of Jubilee. And really, it's an economic instruction that's there. There's a lot of worship and praise and recognition of the dependence of God. But in the year of Jubilee, all land that would have been purchased is returned back to the family under whom it was originally titled. Got that? Any person who was enslaved, say for a debt, or they had indentured themselves as a servant to another, they would be set free. and every 50 years, every debt forgiven. You're like, oh, that'd never work here. You're right. But guess what? They didn't think it would work either, and they didn't do it. They didn't do it. In fact, if you look over in 2 Chronicles 36:20, you'll find that they're carried off into captivity, and then it says, and the land finally had the Sabbath years that it never had. That if God's people don't obediently follow His plan is going to happen anyway. And everybody that thought they owned something, man, when you get carried off into a foreign land, you don't own anything. And again, there's a reference there to the prophet Jeremiah. And that's what I want to link to. How many of y'all know Jeremiah 29:11? Y'all know that one, right? We love it. Well, we love that verse. Jeremiah 29:11. Man, we put it on plaques, we put it on T-shirts, we write it to graduating high school students. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare, not for your harm, to give you a future with hope. But if you totally ignore verse 10, you miss the point. Verse 10 says, thus says the Lord, only when Babylon's 70 years are completed will I visit you. And I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. Man, their failure to follow God's guidance of keeping it simple cost them. We want to think that, right? We want to think, oh, God's just like, oh, we're all under grace. No consequences for sin. No consequences for being selfish. No consequences for being greedy. No consequences for ignoring the needs of people that are out there, that are among us in the world today. And no consequences for thinking only about me. But there are. And I don't know about you, 70 years to wait for God to give us a future of hope doesn't kind of fit into our instant mindset. But that's the whole context of it. So having set up that wonderful sense of joy and urgency for us today, look at some things that are good advice about being simple. And we live in a time, right? We've kind of learned, like, we're in this cycle of like, oh, I can get that new thing, or this will be on the store shelf, or this vehicle, or, I can trade a vehicle every 2-3 years. Like, you understand what I'm saying? We kind of got in this cycle of we can always just get stuff. In the last couple of years, we've kind of had this kind of enforced simpling happen in our lives, haven't we? I mean, we can cry, but it's kind of been nice in some ways. We've learned some things. And so these things, these suggestions here for simpling lives, I put on the screen for you. And you can look them up there in the YouVersion app, but they're right there. When you buy stuff, buy things that are useful for you, not to impress others. Reject things that you purchase that cause addictions for people, much less for you. Give things away regularly. All right? Give it away. Refuse technology hype. Ooh, Pastor, I left it over there. Right? We believe the latest and the greatest and the fastest is the bestest. Enjoy what is available for free. That's good homework for you. Just make a list of everything that you find enjoyable that costs nothing. Here's a few more. They're on the screen. Grow your appreciation for creation. We live in a place where that is easy, right? Just walk outside. Use caution about indebtedness. Speak plainly and truthfully. Now we're getting to the economy of your words. If you have an oppressive practice, something that you're bound to, find a way to break that. Get some help. And then last and most importantly, if something distracts you from spending time with God and His Word and His call and His work in your life, get rid of it. Be afraid of it. Shun it from your life. Now, those are just general things, and if they spark conversations, great. That's what it's intended to do. This is not so specific for every single one of us that needs to address every one of those things. But as we realize the danger of not simplifying and seeing whatever we have as a gift from God that can be used for His glory, for His purposes, for His work, and His multiplication of blessing among us, when we do that, we do something that the nation of Israel never did. They did not stop in Sabbath. So it's not just about what can we hoard. Dare I say it? Did anybody, like a couple of years ago, go and try to buy as much toilet paper as they could so they'd have plenty to give away? No. We're like, oh, I got to have toilet paper. But seriously, that's where we are. This deals with us at the core of who we are as sinful beings of the flesh. We're all there. I don't stand before you as being somebody perfect on these things, but look again here. So again, those are those simpling ideas, and one way to really learn how important it is to be simpling and how little you need is to spend time alone. And I mean away alone. Because solitude isn't the same for everybody. Everybody's alone in different ways. That's why I call it alone-ish time, right? And I'm not talking about feeling lonely, because I think everyone addresses that somehow, sometimes. You feel alone. Sometimes you meet a crowd of people and you're just like, nobody knows how I feel. That's another matter. And we want to love one another and recognize that. I'm talking about being intentional about disconnecting yourself like Jesus did. I mean, Jesus didn't choose celebrity status. Instead, he got away to be alone. And that's important because it comes out in us when we spend that time that's alone. Years ago, I heard this little formula here, so I did not make this up, and I don't know who made it up first to start with, but it just kind of reads like this. If you're going to have alone-ish time, it's great to have a habit for it, a practice for it, and that is have little bitty times each day that you just relax. Just relax. Don't have an agenda. Like if you're one of those people that has to have every block on the calendar full, then block like your time that you're not doing anything. It's okay. Now, some people would say, well, yeah, I'd like to have 8 hours of alone-ish time. It's the mother of preschoolers says. Right? I get that. And which means sometimes in families and in households, maybe you ought to have conversations about how you can help one another have alone-ish time. Can you take on something so the other can have a little bit of alone-ish time to relax? The other one is to recover weekly. The idea of Sabbath is to spend time to just kind of recoup, to do that kind of in that rhythm. We're needed to spend that time for recovery. Years ago, a study was done. This is in the early days of zoos and zookeeping. And they found that if they let the animals take one day off from being on display out of 7, they stayed healthier and lived longer. Imagine that in God's created rhythm. The animals themselves were aware of that. So we need this time. We need to gather together. Again, I know we live in a world that's so busy and people are like, oh, I need this weekend. I got to go on this trip. I got to go on that trip. I get that. But we need that general overalized habit of gathering together for worship. And thankfully you can travel. You can join us by Facebook. Or you can find a way to stop and communicate back with your congregation. We need that together. The other thing is to refresh monthly. What is it that rejuvenates you, that refills your tank? Is it reading? Is it listening to some music? Whatever it is that somehow kind of helps you recoup. Sometimes, and you have to do this more than once a month, maybe, but working outside, just fixing something, that makes me feel like I did something. I feel refreshed. And then the last one is to retreat yearly. And this is just to take that time alone, even for a couple of days, just to be away, to be disconnected. And to get away. when you do these things, you find that your presence does matter, but not always in the way you think. Our sense of self-importance is often attached to the things we have and the time we spend with people and our perceived sense of influence upon them. We think we really are going to have this huge impact upon them. But when we step back from what we have and our interactions with others, we realize it's all about us bringing Christ to the conversation. Again, I started earlier talking about words, and I have learned through life that words really do matter, right? Remember when you're a little kid, they tell you sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me? I got scars from words. The bruises healed. The bones knit together. Words matter. But I also remember words that make me feel stronger. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a book called Life Together. Most folks haven't read this one, but in it, it's a great kind of conversation book about the congregation, about the body of the church being these people who are doing life together. We are collected. And he says he says, real silence, when he's talking about being alone, real stillness, really holding one's tongue comes only as the sober consequence of spiritual stillness. I wrote, when thinking about this, how much our words matter, and that if we treated them like a blank check in which others could write the value, we might not speak so quickly. Week before last, I had the opportunity to spend 2 days completely alone. Did it a year ago, the same time. Went to Caprock Canyon. That's a picture of it. It's a very alone-ish place, right? If you've lived in Southeast Texas all your life, that's probably a frightening image. There is no forest. There is no running river there. There is hardly cell service there. But that's kind of why I like it. Not because I don't want to have the cell phone service, but it's a place I learned I can get alone and camp out alone. Not because I don't like people. It's just nice to have that time. And what I learn is that when I get away from the baffled busyness of the world, in which I think my presence and my possessions are so all-fired important to me and everyone else, I learn in the silence amazing things. Amazing things. So I would like to encourage you to step back from the importance of what you have in the importance of your schedule. Man, if it would freak you out to spend more than 15 minutes with the phone turned off, try it this week. And see if you can't see a change in the way that you align your life. Because we live in a time where we think it's all about, I've got to have this vision, I've got to have these goals, I've got to have these plans and all these things, and we try to order life and get it all structured and make things work and things that we have to get done in our schedule and things that are in front of us, and we worry about all of those things. And the scripture from Old Testament through the image of Christ is all about stepping back and saying, if you really believe God's got this, why are you grabbing it back? Because in our life of trying to make goals and ask God to bless, when we stop back and simplify and join the still moments, we learn that the goals for our life that God has for us are discovered when we are dependent less upon what we have and whom we are and upon the one who has made us and all there is and holds it forever.